After becoming a millionaire, I pretended to be homeless to see who actually loved me. It happened quietly, without fireworks, applause, or even a proper celebration. One idea, one long brewing tech solution in the field of logistics automation, went from prototype to acquisition in 9 months. The buyer was large, international, and aggressive. I had poured every ounce of effort into building that startup for 3 years straight, sleeping 4 hours a night, skipping holidays, living in the back office of a friend's shared warehouse. When the wire transfer hit my account, the numbers didn't even look real. 8 digits, clean, final. Just like that, I was a millionaire. But instead of euphoria, what settled in my chest was a quiet unease, like someone had pulled a curtain back and shown me a world I wasn't prepared to see. Almost instantly, I wasn't alone anymore. People who hadn't spoken to me in years began showing up with messages laced in sugar. "Hey, just saw your name on the news. So proud of you." As if pride ever came without presents. Former classmates who once walked past me in high school corridors now acted as if we'd shared life stories. A cousin I hadn't seen in a decade suddenly wanted to grab lunch and catch up. The shift in tone wasn't subtle. It was precise, orchestrated, hollow. They didn't ask how I felt or what I planned next. Instead, they probed indirectly, fishing for clues about my bank balance. Worse still, the people closest to me began shifting, too. Small things. A best friend of 15 years casually mentioning his new business idea during every hangout. My own mother, who once refused to let me borrow her car to go to a job interview, began talking about unexpected bills and her recent interest in downsizing. It all felt tainted. I wasn't sure if they were seeing me anymore, or if they were simply seeing the opportunities that clung to my wallet. So, I disappeared. Not entirely, but just enough to erase the image they'd all attached themselves to. I rented a small storage unit on the edge of the city where I parked my car, a glossy black coupe that had once been the only indulgence I allowed myself. I stripped away the signs of success. My beard went first, then my hair got trimmed down until even I barely recognized myself in the mirror. Expensive watch into a locked drawer. Designer clothes boxed up. I purchased plain cargo pants from a thrift store. A windbreaker with frayed cuffs, and a cap that smelled faintly of dust, and something long forgotten. Then, with a backpack slung across one shoulder, I walked into a part of town I used to drive past without thought. The street corner I chose sat between a closed-down diner and a pharmacy that hadn't been remodeled since the early 2000s. People came and went constantly. Commuters, shopkeepers, teenagers on electric scooters. No one gave me more than a passing glance. I leaned against the wall, occasionally shifting my weight to relieve the pressure on my lower back, watching the world go on without me. On the first day, I said nothing to anyone. By the third day, something became painfully clear. Not a single familiar face acknowledged me. I saw one of my coworkers from the startup, someone who used to invite me to game nights, walking past with a coffee in hand. He glanced in my direction and then crossed the street without a pause. He didn't even slow down. The woman I dated on and off for 6 months, the one who once told me I made her feel safe, walked by with a group of friends. She didn't recognize me, or maybe she did and chose not to. One of them murmured something and laughed quietly. I caught the words rough shape and should have known. Some faces showed recognition without kindness. A man I used to call a mentor, my old manager from my first job out of college, paused, squinted, and then shook his head with a look I couldn't quite place. Disappointment? Pity? He whispered something to the woman beside him, and they both kept walking. But there was one person who didn't keep walking. Her name was Lily. She worked at the pet store across the street. I hadn't known her before, not from school, not from any party, not from the startup world. Just a stranger in the sea of unfamiliarity. On my 5th day on the corner, she came over with a coffee in a paper cup, the lid already snapped on. She offered it to me like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You look cold," she said simply. "I didn't know if you liked cream or sugar, so I left it plain." I accepted it. Not because I needed it. My account balance could have paid for 10,000 coffees, but because it meant something real in a world that had gone false. She didn't ask for anything in return. Didn't try to push a brochure or ask probing questions. She just sat on the curb next to me and talked. About her day, her job, her dog, a mutt named Benny who she rescued from a shelter. She never once asked why I was there. Not in the beginning. Not even after 3 days of showing up with a sandwich or just sitting in silence for a while. There was no hidden agenda in her, no expectation, no interest in anything but the moment. And in those moments, I remembered what it was like to be seen. A week passed before I returned to my life. I left the street corner at dusk, walked 5 blocks to the storage unit, changed clothes, and took a cab home. My condo still smelled like lavender and wood polish. The walls hadn't changed, the bank statements hadn't either, but everything else felt different. The next morning I put on a tailored suit, dark gray, hand-stitched lapels, subtle pinstripe, the kind of outfit people take notice of. I polished my shoes until they reflected light. I wore the watch I'd kept locked away for months. My hair was styled the way the magazines said successful men wore theirs. And I walked, not to a boardroom, not to a private club, but back to that same corner. Lily was there carrying a brown paper bag. She didn't recognize me immediately. Her eyes flicked over me, the way people glance past businessmen in the city. Then she did a double take. Her expression didn't change. Not shock, not betrayal, just confusion. "Wait, you look familiar," she said, blinking. "I should," I replied. "You gave me coffee, 3 days in a row." Her eyes narrowed slightly, then widened. "That was you?" I nodded, and then I told her the truth. About the startup. The money, the experiment, everything. She listened. Silent, still. Not a flicker of anger on her face, just the weight of understanding settling in. "You pretended to be homeless?" I needed to know who would see me if I had nothing, if they'd treat me the same when I had no power, no label, no advantage to offer. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then softly, "I saw you because you looked like someone who needed to be seen." I didn't respond. There was nothing else to say. She didn't ask for a reward. She didn't even ask for an explanation beyond what I had already given. Later that afternoon, I visited some of the others. The coworker who crossed the street without a word. He invited me inside, suddenly warm and cheerful. I declined. The woman I had dated asked if we could talk over dinner. I refused. One by one, I revisited the faces that had failed the test. Some lied. Some begged. Some disappeared altogether, blocked my number, or vanished from every app. I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. Because money changes how people treat you, but stripping it all away, that reveals who they've always been. Returning to the world I'd built before vanishing felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone had rehearsed their lines. Everyone but me. The suit I wore fit perfectly, the watch ticked with quiet precision, and the shoes carried the polished confidence of wealth. But inside, I felt like an observer. I didn't re-enter my old life to celebrate the money or show off success. I came back to see what remained after the mask was lifted. The first place I went wasn't my office or the bank. It was the cafe where I used to meet my closest friends on Sunday mornings. We called it a tradition. That word used to mean something. But after disappearing, none of them asked where I had gone. Not one message. Not a call. Now, as I walked in, dressed in tailored clothing instead of worn-out layers, 3 of them were sitting at our usual table by the window. The same table where we once laughed about nothing for hours. The moment they saw me, forks paused midair, mugs lowered. Paul, the loudest of the group, stood up, pretending surprise. "Man, where have you been? We were starting to think you left the country." I didn't reply right away. I just pulled out a chair and sat across from them. All eyes were locked on me. Before I said anything, I scanned their faces. Paul, James, and Derek. 3 people who'd known me before the idea, before the business, before anything valuable was attached to my name. "I was around," I said. "You just didn't notice." Derek frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I was on a corner less than 6 blocks from here for 10 days. You passed by twice. Didn't even look at me." James shifted in his seat. "Wait, that was really you? We didn't think it could be." Paul forced a laugh. "You're messing with us, right? That wasn't actually... I watched you cross the street when I looked you in the eye. You didn't even blink." They said nothing. Not for a long time. The silence was heavier than any argument could have been. "You didn't look like yourself," Derek finally said, as if that explained anything. "I wasn't trying to. That was the point." Paul leaned forward. "So what? You're testing us now? Like we were supposed to recognize you dressed like that, sitting on the ground with a backpack. I wanted to know who'd see me when there was no reason to. No gain. No benefit. Just me, unnoticed, unremarkable. James rubbed the back of his neck. Look, maybe we failed the test, but people don't know how to act in situations like that. It's awkward. How awkward is stepping over someone who used to call you brother? I said. They looked away. All three. I didn't push further. I stood up, left a tip on the table, and walked out without another word. The next visit was to my mother. That conversation weighed heavier than all the others combined. She had been calling more frequently after the acquisition went public. Her tone had shifted, more polite, more careful. She'd started referring to me as her smart son instead of just her boy. At first, I wanted to believe the change came from pride. Now I wasn't so sure. When she opened the door, her eyes widened. "You look so sharp today," she said, stepping aside. I didn't sit. I stood in the middle of the living room, glancing at the neatly arranged pillows on the couch we never used growing up because it was for guests. "I came to talk," I said plainly. "Not about money." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she gestured for me to sit, but I remained where I was. She finally sighed and folded her arms. "You've been distant." I had to be. "You should have told me what you were doing. That project of yours, it really worked out, didn't it?" "It did. You're a millionaire now. Several times over." Her expression shifted, something between admiration and calculation. "That's wonderful, truly. Maybe now we can talk about those things we left hanging. Your cousin's schooling, the home repairs." I shook my head. "You never asked me how I was doing through those years I struggled, never visited. But now suddenly it's about shared responsibilities?" She flinched. Just slightly. "I didn't know what you were going through," she said defensively. "I told you I was sleeping on a warehouse floor. You called it a phase." She went quiet. "I sat on a sidewalk for 10 days, just blocks from your house. You didn't notice, didn't see me. But when the headline dropped, you remembered my number." "You were testing me?" she asked, tone sharp. "No," I replied. I was finding out what was already true. I left before she could say more. Some encounters went easier, others worse. There were people who simply didn't care, whose eyes glazed over the moment I stepped out of poverty's shadow. And then there were those who tried to rewrite the past. Apologies surfaced, excuses were made, but none of them rang genuine. The only person I kept seeing without hesitation was Lily. She didn't ask questions about the money or the startup. When I showed up at the pet store during her lunch break, she smiled like it was just another day. We sat on a bench outside, watching pedestrians stroll past. Benny, her dog, lay at her feet, tail thumping lazily. "You didn't have to keep coming here," she said once. "I want to." "You could be anywhere, doing anything. Why this? Because most people saw through a filter. You didn't. That matters." She didn't react with awe or surprise. She just nodded, like it made sense. Over time, we talked more. Not about the experiment or the money, but about real things. How people disappoint themselves before they disappoint others. How trust gets thinner when stretched too far. How loneliness is quieter when surrounded by a crowd than when sitting alone. At some point, I began taking meetings again. Not for money. Not for new ventures. Just to see who still believed in ideas more than wealth. I reached out to a developer I'd worked with during my startup's roughest months. Someone who had never asked for more than his due, even when payments came late. I offered him a lead role in something new, something unannounced. He asked only one thing. Why me? Because when it didn't pay well, you still believed in the work. His reply was simple. Then let's build something that doesn't need a disguise to prove its value. I made similar choices elsewhere. I hired a receptionist who had once been overlooked for promotions at her old job because she didn't network aggressively. I brought in an old classmate who never asked for favors but always showed up when no one else did. Quiet people, steady people, people who didn't flinch when they saw someone sitting alone on a sidewalk. The longer I went on, the more I saw how many masks people wore, not because they were cruel or fake, but because they'd learned to mirror expectations. The world rewarded polished exteriors, not authenticity. But when I stripped mine away, what surfaced from others wasn't just disappointment, it was silence. That silence said more than any rejection ever could. Lily never asked what came next, but I told her anyway. I planned to fund a new platform, not another logistics tool or app, something different. A program designed to help low-visibility workers connect with opportunities based on skills alone, not appearance or background. The idea wasn't revolutionary. It was human. "You think people will use it?" she asked one evening. "Some won't. Some will pretend they don't need it. But the ones who do, maybe they'll finally get seen." She reached down and patted Benny's head. "You're not trying to fix the world, are you?" "No, I'm just tired of pretending in it." There were nights I returned to that corner. Not in disguise. Just standing nearby, watching the flow of people. Every now and then, someone would stop and look at the space like they remembered something. Or someone. Most just kept moving. A boy, maybe 15, once sat on the same spot I had. Torn jacket, shaking hands. I bought him a sandwich. Didn't say anything. Just handed it to him and kept walking. By then, it wasn't about experiments. It wasn't about proving anything. It was just a small action. Quiet, honest. The kind of gesture that no one notices, but the one who needs it most. And the more I did it, the more I realized something that success had never taught me. Wealth might change the world around you, but kindness is what changes the part inside you that money can't reach. 2 months passed since I came back into the light of my old life. Long enough for people to make up stories, justify their actions, and twist memories. Most had moved on, either trying to stay close or distancing themselves altogether after realizing no reward was coming. The truth didn't matter to many. Only the outcome did. But I had already seen what I needed. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't disappointed either. The feeling was sharper than that, final, like closing a door with no intent to return. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. And now I had it. The company I began building after the experiment, Trueform, was already picking up attention in closed circles. Not from investors or media, but from people who'd spent their lives overlooked, misjudged, and sidelined. They weren't flashy, and they didn't speak in boardroom slogans. They worked quietly, delivered consistently, and expected little beyond fairness. My platform didn't promise them fame or fortune. It gave them access, clean, simple, unbiased. No photos, no status fields, just skill, effort, and proof of work. That was enough. Lily had agreed to help as a community manager. She still worked at the pet store, but came in on weekends and evenings to help onboard people. Not because I asked her to, but because she believed in what we were doing. She never once mentioned compensation. When I offered her equity, she only said, "If you think it's deserved, I'll take it." That was her way. She didn't measure people by their titles or wallets. She wasn't the only one I trusted with the foundation. I brought back a handful of people who never asked for anything during the time I'd vanished. They weren't loud. They didn't demand answers. They simply stayed the same. One of them was Clara, an intern who used to bring me coffee back when I slept in the office. I offered her a directorial role. She cried when I told her, not because of the promotion, but because I remembered. Once the structure was set, I made a final list, a list of names tied to the past, the people who had crossed lines, shown their priorities, or vanished when I had nothing to offer. Each name came with a decision, not out of bitterness, but clarity. Who would be allowed to remain in my life, and who wouldn't? My old friends from the cafe were the first on the list. Paul sent me a message after seeing a social media post about Trueform. He wanted to catch up again, said he had ideas. I didn't respond. I archived the message. James sent a longer one, an apology masked as a business pitch. I didn't reply to him either. Derek never reached out at all. I appreciated his silence more than their words. My mother's name sat at the top. I visited her one last time. The house looked exactly the same. She greeted me with practiced warmth, not knowing where the conversation was headed. "I'm not angry," I said as soon as I sat down. She raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "Everything." There was a pause, then she gave a small nod, as if expecting something more. "But I won't pretend anymore," I added. "You weren't there when I needed help, and now that I have something, you see me again. You're still my son." "I am. But love has to move both ways." She looked away. "I won't cough," I said, "but I won't carry guilt for choosing peace." That was the last time we spoke face to face. A few days later, I finalized the structure of the company. I placed ownership in a trust, ensuring that if anything happened to me, control would go to people who had helped build it, not people related to me by blood or past friendships. I drafted the documents with a quiet sense of relief. I also visited the corner where it all began one final time. I went alone. No cameras, no announcement, just me. The sidewalk hadn't changed. Same worn bricks, same faded graffiti on the wall. But it felt different now, like a place I'd stepped through rather than stayed in. I saw someone sitting there, not the boy from before. A middle-aged man, unshaven, staring into the distance with the weight of someone who'd stopped expecting anything. I bought him a sandwich and a bottle of water. No speech, no questions. I handed it to him and walked on. That was enough. I returned to the office that evening to find Lily already there. She was seated near the window with Benny curled under her chair, eyes half closed. She looked up when I entered. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just finished something." She didn't press. She never did. "Want to grab dinner?" she asked after a while. "Sure." We left the building, not as boss and assistant, not even as rich man and regular woman, but as two people who had seen enough of the world to value what was simple and real. We walked a few blocks without saying much. The streets were calm, familiar. We sat at a small diner with cracked menus and paper napkins, the kind of place no one photographed for social media. She ordered a salad. I asked for soup. Halfway through the meal, she asked, "Do you feel different now?" "Not really, just lighter." "Do you think it was worth it? Disappearing, hiding, watching everyone?" "Yes, because now I know. I don't have to wonder anymore." She nodded. "Then that's all that matters." We finished quietly. No dramatic conclusion. No lessons to preach, just closure. Later that week, I held a private event. Not a party, not a launch. Just a small gathering of the people who mattered. No press, no investors, just the ones who stayed true. I told them the full story about the street corner, the disguises, the tests, the disappointment, the moments of clarity. Not everyone understood it completely, but no one judged. They listened, they nodded, and they stayed after the last word. As the room cleared and I stood in the silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace without condition. Money had brought attention, but losing the image of wealth had revealed the truth. It didn't break me. It showed me the parts of life that were real and the ones that were decoration.